Welcome to the Startups Without Borders podcast. I'm Valentina Primo, and I'm the founder of this platform, this community, and this movement for entrepreneurs who are starting new ventures while starting new lives. Each week, we'll be sharing inspiring interviews with the most audacious startup founders while highlighting resources for anyone starting up. Gear up to get some real-life advice. You're listening to the Startups Without Borders podcast, episode 5. Today, we speak to Saddam Sayyaleh. Saddam grew up in the Jerash refugee camp in Jordan. It was from that unlikely setting that he embarked on an incredible journey that took him to India and back to Jordan to start a social enterprise to empower youth. In this episode, we dig into the principle of value first, profit second, discussing how to create a startup that is profitable and has an impact mission. Saddam, I'm so excited to have you on the episode today. Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
You're welcome. I'm excited for it.
How are things in Jordan now?
Cold, but super fun. For the past couple of days for me, we've been graduating children and youth from our end of the year cycle. So it was very exciting, but still cold.
Wow. That sounds really amazing. So I wanted to start by talking about your beginnings as an entrepreneur. You grew up in a Palestinian refugee camp, and I wanted to illustrate for all listeners who have never been there, how would you describe life there?
Good question. I would say refugee camps generally, whether Palestinian, Syrian, Afghani, Pakistani. I visited so many refugee camps and I see a lot of similarity. There are two parts about refugee camps that makes it different from a small town, which is one is the mindset of people, the instability that people live in this land that they don't know when are they going back to their homeland, or they don't have citizenships and so on. Yeah. It's the mindset that temporary, that means we don't take long-term decisions. Yeah. And the idea of also co-dependency on aid agencies and so on. And the second part, living in a refugee camp, is the marginalizations of refugee camps in the sense of infrastructure, in the sense of opportunities and activities that are in the camp. It's quite a difficult, tough environment to live in, especially sometimes there will be an absence of law, because it's also refugee camps are small communities. Yeah. That means people will hide things just for the sake of protecting one another, and not necessarily good things or bad things. So it's a mix of both. It's a very tough environment for someone to be labeled as a refugee or someone who lives in a refugee camp. Yeah. It's in any country in the world, and in Jordan the same. So it's a very, I hope I answered, but it's usually because it's a psycho thing that refugee camps are special with, and the environment itself, it's quite tough. Yeah. It's not easy to live in such environment.
And what do you think ignited the entrepreneurial spark in you as a very young adult?
It's a mix of everything. I think living in a very rough environment. I always say, whoever lives in a refugee camp or in a very marginalized area with a lot of threats and so many unexpected things happening, you have a 911 always on your head. Yeah. So wherever you go, wherever you look, you're always watching your back. You're always looking into opportunities because there is a lack of opportunities. So it's either you create your own opportunity or you take other people's opportunities. So it's survival to the fittest, I think. But going back to your question, it's a mix of how I grew up, having that 911 always in my head and still stuck with me up till now.
Yeah.
And the second part is, I would say, it's what the outside world, the outside environment of the camp taught me. It taught me, that there are opportunities, but why in the camp we don't have opportunities? It's that comparison that I noticed. Is, for example, there's lack of opportunities in the camp, but when I was outside, I saw opportunities that I can bring to the camp. And in the same time, I was like, so why it's not getting there? What's the barrier? Why there is no one working around it? But then you have the political, economic situation, which taught me also a lot of things, because living in a camp, that means you're participating. It's like civic engagement, but in so many levels, in such an early time of your life, that teaches you entrepreneurial skills, but you don't know that it's entrepreneurial skills until you put it in a jar.
Wow. In a jar. What does that mean?
For me, it was iLearn. That's where I put all these skills, my learnings in one jar. And I decided that I want to invest my learnings, because I didn't have money. I didn't have anything. I don't have a social status. I don't come from a wealthy background. So the only thing I can invest in and put it in this jar, which was iLearn, is myself, my knowledge, my skills, my 911.
Right. I would love to know everything about iLearn, but just before going there, I wanted to hear again that story you told me once about this little boy selling tea to tourists, and how that kind of started the whole entrepreneurial journey, right? Yeah.
Sometimes I feel my story is special, but I think there's so many untold stories. Just a little bit of, my friend was telling me there's so many heroes out there are in the waiting line. Yeah. And when I asked him, what does it mean? And he told me, you are a hero, but you got your opportunity. But there's so many heroes out there that they share so much like you. And I was very happy that he mentioned that, because going back to, how I grew up, I grew up as an orphan. Going to school was tough. Not having someone to protect you, to back you up whenever there is a problem and so on. Ended up, working in a very young age, because I wanted a decent living. I wanted to be independent rather than, getting food and food coupons from NGOs and so on. So I started working early in Jerash tourism site, and I was, selling coffee and tea to tourists. But then, going back a little bit to my school, it's the only subject in school that I was interested in was English. So that it was a perfect fit, finding a job in the tourism side to having English as my favorite topic. Working in the tourism side, I was introduced, or I met an archaeologist. His name is Gilbert, who took me under his wing. And the first thing he did, which was very unexpected, he told me, Saddam, I want you to teach me Arabic. I'll make your English better. So I started selling him coffee and tea on a daily basis, sitting down for an hour, 30 minutes every day. Or while I'm passing by, throwing words at each other. That was fun.
Wow.
But when Gilbert finished his contract in Jordan, he gave me a little bit of money, and that basically kicked my life started, got my life started. And as any young Arab, or I would say any young person who lives in a difficult circumstances, they would always think of immigration. Yeah. Like, I want to run away from my environment. I want to run away from the camp. I want to start something new. I want to meet new people. So I went to the first internet cafe. I decided cheapest country in the world, easiest visa for Jordanians. And I got my visa. I went to India.
Wow.
I would say Indian, they're very good in marketing India, but it's just very different from reality. But
right.
when I got there, I got an opportunity to volunteer, and I stayed there for a year and a half. But what's special about my trip in India, which has to do with the previous question, is what sparked to start my own initiative, is I volunteered in an organization that they were a rescue mission for children.
Yeah.
Children who have deadly diseases, children who didn't have a place to sleep, mutilated children. And I was very young. I was 18 at that time. And what I really learned from my experience in India was that my suffering was not the greatest.
Yeah.
That you know, we all live in a cycle where we think our suffering is the greatest until we see the opposite, when we have something to compare it with. Mm. And in my head, I was feeling, depressed because I had to go through this, the interaction with these children. And then, but also I wanted to save them. I had this Superman idea.
Yeah.
But then I realized that, no, I'm not a Superman. I realized my weaknesses, but also I realized what is suffering, but also I realized how lucky I am and how lucky the people in the camp are, and they just need to realize that.
Yeah.
So I came back to Jordan. I started working as a barista in a cafe. I met great friends, and I decided in 2012 to start iLearn. And I think your next question is, what is iLearn, right?
Exactly. What we all want to know now.
So we started iLearn at an orphanage where I basically spent, 90% of my time when I was a child. And I just wanted to start there because the children who are there now, once I was one of them.
Yeah.
But the difference is I broke or I got away from the vicious cycle that keeps continuing. Mm-hmm. And I decided I want to do something different. I want to give an opportunity, an option for these children. Just think of it as a tree. If you are in this orphanage or in any camp, you have one or two apples to choose from. Yeah. And what my mission was is how can I have 10 apples, create more options that they can choose whatever they want rather than get stuck with one apple.
Yeah.
So we started an academic support program, but then it got developed. So we are in the education side and informal education. So what we did is we started, because we didn't have the money then, which I'm lucky for right now, because it helped me to create a social impact model that can easily be replicated anywhere in the world and with a very low budget. That means the sustainability of such model is high. I didn't have this perception, this knowledge when I started iLearn, but now all these words, all these models, sustainability, impact, I learned through my journey. So what we did is we started bringing teachers, university students, and children, and we started reusing public spaces in these communities, bringing all these people together, teachers bringing their knowledge, plus they get the opportunity to experiment in an outside space of schools, that when they get confident of the experiments that they're trying outside the school, it will reflect and impact the classrooms of these children. And when we started thinking of university students, we created a pipeline of network of private sector, public sector, entrepreneurs, startups, that we asked them to start coming into these communities and start training and giving internship for young people so they can have better opportunities of employment. Because distant is a big thing in the Middle East. Transport is a big thing. Yeah. So how can we create an outsource pipeline? How can we bring all these startups, private sector, and people to these communities to elevate the level of these young people and also give them a better opportunity for a better future? And we started thinking about the spaces. There's so many public spaces in all around the world that are misused or they are not used at all. They're just there.
Yeah.
So we started using these spaces and turning them into what we call a space for knowledge. And that's when we started, bringing children who are dropout, children at risk, children who are, suffering socioeconomic problems, children who are at risk of dropping out in a year and two. Mm-hmm. And we started bringing unemployed youth, youth who dropped out in a young age like myself, and we started targeting parents. In iLearn, I think my vision when we started it is, I don't believe that if we work with children, we can fix their problem. I think we need to work in a holistic approach, that we create a mechanism, and it's like disrupting the roles of the community today, giving them new roles and organizing them in a way that under one umbrella, which is the space, and giving them enough incentives and resources that they feel as one community, one purpose. And once that mechanism starts working, they start, it becomes a norm inside this community, that this space is normal to have. So the community demands it and sustain it just by feeling the need and maintaining it through putting their own resources in it. Right. And that creates a sustainability of our model, which help us to scale to different communities every time we sustain one space. So since 2012, we sustained 8 spaces. So that means, Souf Camp, where I grew up in, we sustained the space. They have an initiative. They're running the program by themselves, and we are shadowing them and giving them mentorship. And then we go to a new area. We do the same mechanism, though it's very different from one area to another. But we were able to document our processes. We were able to create content that help us to scale to different communities. And now we're now we're thinking on how can we scale outside Jordan.
Right. Now, in all this, where is the business model? How do you fund and how do you make profit with iLearn? Right.
This is a good step for us. So for iLearn, because there's a difficult situation in the MENA with regulations for social enterprises and social impact programs. It's either you're labeled as an NGO or a company.
Right.
So for iLearn, what we created is a mixture of everything. So we created content that we provide to private schools that they pay for it. For extracurricular activities, and which is a demanded content, continuous demanded content. It's an untapped market in the MENA, I would say, the extracurricular activity content, especially from a trusted source. And then we started going to CSR programs in private sector. For example, the Micro Fund for Women in Jordan. They have, hundreds of thousands of women taking microfinance, microloans from them. And they have a CSR program to educate the children of these women who are taking loans. And so they were looking for a program that is flexible, scalable, and it couldn't go anywhere in the country. So we partnered with them, and now we're going into our second year, going to all different rural areas, benefiting the children of these women. And it was a revenue stream for us. And now we're scaling this model to go to different also private sector who are working either with children or with women. So the two revenues is mainly revolving around our content and methodology and selling it to private schools, private sector. And our next step is how can we create a product, because we were, just to give you a little bit of our mindset, is we ask ourselves 2 questions, sustaining our impact and sustaining our organization. So sustaining our impact, we're 100% on the road. So we're on it. Sustaining our organization, we started this discussion this year and we started implementing different pilots. to create, 2-3 models that are fit to iLearn, where we can sustain it financially. So next year, hopefully, we're getting the funding we need to start creating a business development department at iLearn, that we will continually create different models, different products to create revenue for us.
Right. I guess your case is one of those cases when you really, really put value first and profit second, right? I mean, Tony,
absolutely. It's a tough model. Social enterprises is a very tough model because you have so many different elements, and you need to maintain free education, free resources for people who you're serving. In the same time, how can you create a value net for private sector and private schools to buy it in the same time?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I mean, Tony Robbins, which is someone I follow a lot and admire a lot, he always says, find that spot where you add more value than anyone else, and then profit will come, revenue will come. So I think that's, And also I always say, it's no problem to create, revenue doesn't mean capitalism, or that means you're selling something. Revenue can be for the private schools to buy your content. They have a need. They need the content. Yeah. But also they have the responsibility to local communities. Yeah. So when they buy it from you, they're practicing their social responsibility as well. Yeah. Definitely. So how did you do it at the beginning, in the early days of iLearn, when you didn't have partners yet? What was the first steps you took to really fund this?
Well, I honestly would say for the first 3 years of iLearn, I was funding it from my own salary.
Wow. Yeah, well, which is what many of us do, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I quit my job early 2017.
Yeah.
And iLearn became my full-time job. But before that, since 2012, I was, working 2 jobs, any freelance work, just to maintain iLearn running and sustained.
Right. Did you have role models? Who was that person that you would always look up to whenever you fall down the
I know this is gonna sound cliche.
Yeah.
But the first thing I would do, actually, when I feel down or I feel pressured, up till now, actually, I would go to one of the areas where we work, call a couple or 10 volunteers that we have, many amazing young people, and play cards with them and start joking around and talk about random stuff. I generate, energy for the whole month, and I go back home smiling and believing in what I do more than before.
Wow.
So they are my role models in a way, and they are my, let's say, my engine.
Right. They keep your energy high, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of the social businesses that we see are successful, not only financially, but also in the impact they do, are very much in touch with the communities they serve, right? Was that, yeah.
Yeah, but I feel there is always a disconnect. I feel like we sometimes, with all the things we do, 8 communities at iLearn, but the hundreds of people, the hundreds of children that we're serving, sometimes you get overwhelmed. But honestly, all my friends who have initiatives or social enterprises, I always tell them, don't let your work overwhelm you and disconnect you from the people you're serving. Always be around them, because they have suggestions on how can you survive. They have suggestions on how can you work and enhance your work and so on. Every time I play cards with these young people, they give me the solutions for the most difficult question I have in my head without them knowing. So it's usually stay connected. The people we're serving, they're not demanding. They're just simple, and they just like the idea that we're there. So, and we become friends with time.
Right. And it's a test oftentimes to prove that a social startup that does, a lot of good can also do well. So when you talk to investors, when you approach, the startup or the investment sector, How do you go about that?
So, I mean, it's very unfortunate that. So my argument usually with startups, with investors, venture capitalists. So we don't really have impact investors in Jordan.
Yeah.
We have philanthropists, but we don't have impact investors, which I hope this will change with time. Mm-hmm. The ecosystem in Jordan is growing, but unfortunately, social entrepreneurship is not on the agenda very much.
Yeah.
And we need to work around that and make it stronger. But I think it's my responsibility and other people's responsibilities and institutions' responsibility. So we need to find alignment and work around that. But my argument usually with startups, for example, fintech startups, I tell them you need customers. But if the general population are literate about digital finance, they don't know how to use apps. They don't know how to make transactions. They don't know what is fintech. So why would they download your app and start doing transactions or pay their electricity bill on it? Why not to stay in the traditional way? So it's one of the major challenges for them is to convince people that you can pay your electricity bill online, for example.
Yeah.
So the solution we offer is we have hundreds of young people in these communities. They are deep-rooted. We have so many children. We're engaged parents. Through iLearn as a platform, if you fund us for a program or you invest with us, that means we will give you accessibility to 8 different communities with thousands of potential customers. But we need to add a value to this community by teaching them how to use this technology because it will make their lives easier.
Yeah.
So this is one argument that we use with startups, for example, or even investors.
Yeah. It's kind of like the whole merge of, the business world with the nonprofit world. I think today the dividing line is very blurry. And a lot of social businesses are working with a hybrid model where they have to seek funding in the nonprofit sector, but also they want to develop, sustainable forms of revenue making, so businesses.
Absolutely. And I think it's the secret, I'll say the secret recipe is how the business startup scene sees social enterprises as value.
Yeah.
For example, iLearn created this platform in 8 communities where if you are a startup and you're selling a product, we're easily you can penetrate the market of these 8 communities in a second just by utilizing our platform and the trust we created with people.
Yeah.
So it's just finding that recipe between, what the startup goal is or the business is and how do we reach people? How do we create that, brands invest millions just to create trust with their brand.
Yeah.
But social enterprises, they already have the trust established. And if you come through a trusted partner, you don't really have to invest millions. You only need to invest 10,000, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
So it's utilizing platforms that already exist, having a partnership mindset rather, reinventing the wheel.
Yeah.
It's so important in this field.
Yeah, totally. Especially because in the social sphere, but also the humanitarian world, a lot of efforts are double. There's a lot of overlap because organizations just don't want to partner.
Absolutely.
And what would you advise someone who is an entrepreneur, who might be a migrant as well, and wants to start a business that has a social impact? Should they go on the nonprofit funding first, or should they straight down go to selling a product or a service?
Well, honestly, this is the trick. I think it took me 3 to 4 years to answer this question for myself.
Yeah.
I think for any entrepreneur who are coming up into the market, the most important thing I would say that I learned now is be open to experience. Meaning that try different models. There is no one recipe that will work. Yeah. And also be flexible. So I think, what makes iLearn very successful is we are very, how do you say it? Resistant? Not resistant. It's just we're very flexible. Whenever something hits us, we heal fast because our expectations are very normal. We don't have really high expectations of anything. Yeah. So whenever we have something great happening, we get excited for it. And whenever something bad happening, we're okay with it.
Well, I can hear you smile.
So we don't really get disappointed,
Yeah.
So because we have that flexibility of try and error.
Yeah.
Because also the market is unstable. So many stakeholders that you really don't know what will happen. It's like chasing the American dream and it doesn't exist, but it's something can happen, So it's just, but it's really for people who are starting, and I would say it's all up to you. What kind of people you bring around you, what kind of supporters and mentors you have that help you to stick around when the most difficult times comes.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be a happy road. It's going to be ups and downs. It's just having that mindset. I know that what I'm saying, it might, a lot of people say, but it's not easy to sustain your impact and sustain your organization at the same time. So finding that balance is so important. But don't overwhelm yourself with answering these questions, because with time, it comes by itself when priorities are set.
Right. And I think it's also understanding that you can do good while doing well because your business, the nature of and the core of your business has a positive impact. It doesn't have to be necessarily separated. I mean, the impact and the business side, some people see it as an add-on, while it can be totally at the core of your business, right?
Absolutely. I totally agree with what you said.
Yeah. So how do you make sure that you make enough revenue to grow while supporting that impact? So do you kind of separate the two things? How do you make sure you continue to grow?
It's a mix of both, I would say. It's for me, we have M&E systems that we monitor our impact, even with the areas that we're shadowing, to make sure that impact is sustainable, even if it's led by the local community, when to intervene with our mentors and so on. But at the same time is having someone dedicated for the revenue part, the business. And when they come up with a new opportunity, it comes all to the founder and the director to decide whether this revenue opportunity or this money generating opportunity, we can link it with our impact.
Yeah.
So, for example, we have university students volunteering with us. That means they have access to the universities. Uber has Uber ambassadors. They pay them for every student who download the app and use it. They pay them for student to bring drivers. So how can we link our students to Uber ambassadors, which that means our young people benefit to generate small income, but also, feel that we are giving them something. And in the same time, iLearn generating revenue from this partnership with Uber.
Right, exactly.
So this is an example of the mindset that we need to have, because some revenue opportunities can be very separate, but some opportunities we can interlink it with our impact, and it will increase our impact.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you very much, Saddam. This has been really, really not only inspirational, but also educational, I would say.
Thank you so much.
You like what you hear? You should definitely follow us on your favorite platform. So next time you're on Instagram or Facebook, type Startups Without Borders and check out all the videos, the stories, and the resources for you to become a legend.